In this video, I'm going to explain to you dog behavior and body language, specifically overt stress signals that indicate to you that he might be displaying aggressive behavior and what you should do to handle that behavior. Keep watching. What's up guys, it's Jen with Dog Liaison, where I coach you on how to enhance your dog's mental health, and on this channel we break down scientific research in order to inform us on how to train and educate dogs. Today we are talking about body language. This is part one of a 4-part series. I tried to cram all of the stress signals into one video and it just did not work. So this is part one, and if you are interested in seeing parts 2 through 3, make sure you subscribe. If you're watching this video well into the future, I have linked all of the part 2, part 3, part 4 in the description box below, and also it is going to be tagged at the end of this video. So if you're watching this well into the future, it's all there for you. Today's part 1 is about overt stress signals, which are the more commonly deemed aggressive behaviors. One thing that I do want to point out is that it's very common for people to label dogs as aggressive. They'll say that's an aggressive dog, that dog is aggressive. And to me that seems a little bit ridiculous. No dog is one thing. That's kind of like saying that person is all evil. People are multiple things. Dogs are multiple things. So it is that he is displaying aggressive behavior. It is that the behavior that he has displayed in this moment happens to be aggression, but that doesn't necessarily label that dog as aggressive. So we are going to break down those stress signals, those more commonly overt ones. Some of them you probably already intuitively know a little bit, but I want to do a deep dive, and I want to make sure that you guys understand how to handle those situations, what you should do about it, what the dog is informing you with those overt signals. Now, before we jump too far in, I do want to give the disclaimer that dog body language is incredibly complicated because it is highly individual into the dog. So, just like with people, one sentence can be said the same way, and depending on the inflection, it means 2 different things. So you can say, go to your room, or you can say, go to your room. And depending on the inflection and depending on the context of the sentence changes its meaning. And that happens all the time with dog body language, where something will be displayed in one context and it means one thing, but you change the context and the characteristics of it completely, and the definition changes as well. Dogs are going to display stress signals at different periods of time. So, what might occur in one dog at one point could very well occur at a different phase in a different dog. And so because of these variables, it becomes very difficult for people to understand and to communicate dog body language. What I want to do is I want to talk in very general, broad terms. So I'm going to start off very scientific. I'm going to start off very objectively. I will speak to you in the way that scientists would speak about dog body language, that we describe actions, we describe specifically visible behaviors. We can say that dog is doing this. And then in the second half of this video, I will elaborate on, okay, more contextually, more subjectively, this is what's going on, this is what this behavior means, and that subjectivity is based off of my practical experience and my formal education. So some of the more overt, obvious dog stress signals include hair up on the hackles, peeing and defecation, biting, air nipping, barking, lunging, growling, shivering, pacing, whimpering, freezing, and stiffness. These behaviors are considered going over threshold, and they usually happen as a result of adrenaline. They happen as an automatic response. There's not really a whole lot of logic or reasoning usually to these behaviors. Usually the dogs that are doing them repetitiously, usually the dogs that are continuing to growl, continuing to bite, they're doing that logically only because it is working, it is effective. The bite is resulting in whatever their accomplished goal was, and these other precursor signals that they were giving was not accomplishing their goal. Now, in the other parts of this series, we will be talking about those precursor signals that happen before these overt stress signals. But usually what ends up happening is that these overt signals are only going to be demonstrated and used by the dog if the precursor signals are ignored or misunderstood. All animal behavior happens for one of three reasons. That is to find and forage for food, to reproduce, and to avoid hazard, to avoid death. These stress signals are within the context of hazard avoidance. All of these behaviors are used because the dog does not want to die. The dog does not want to get into a fight. That's a huge misconception, is that aggressive dogs, as we just described, as there's no such thing as an aggressive dog, that aggressive dogs want to fight, that they're looking for an opportunity. And that's just not true. It goes against all basic common sense of evolution for animals to be constantly just picking fights willy-nilly just because they want to. That way they would always be killing each other. They would never get the opportunity to reproduce, and it's counterintuitive, counterproductive. So let's break down some of these stress signals. We want to start off with the hackles, the hair on the hackles up. This is also called piloerection, and it happens as a result of the muscles below the fur flexing. So the muscles along the spine, which are happening right below where the hair starts, is flexing and is filling up with blood and oxygen, usually as a result of adrenaline. And so it's all of that hair is sticking up. Peeing and defecation happens under immense amount of stress. It specifically relates to how the body shifts in adrenaline response. So what ends up happening when norepinephrine, which is it's called adrenaline in the brain, but when that is released, the body does effectively a 180 because it wants to conserve energy. So it's going to send all of the energy, all of the preparation for this fight, flight, or freeze response, for this big traumatic event. Adrenaline turns off, it sends blood into the rest of the body, it sends oxygen through the rest of the body, it prepares the body to respond to this immediate threat. And when it does that, it has to turn off other systems. So it turns off reproduction, it turns off digestion, it turns off these other involuntary automatic responses to conserve energy to put into these other event. So what ends up happening when they pee and defecate, we think, is that the digestion system is impaired effectively, and it is not functioning, cohesively as it should. Pacing, shivering, and whimpering occur as a flight response. It tends to happen when the dog feels like he can't actually escape. He's trying to escape, but there's nowhere for him to go. Lunging seems to be a variable unique to domestication. We know that most dogs that have never been on a leash before don't typically lunge at their threat. They might charge or run, but they're not going to yank with their neck like they would on a leash. Barking, quite frankly, seems to be still a mystery as far as science is concerned. We know that dogs do it, but we also know that they do it for a lot of different reasons. But the one thing that is confusing to us the most is that we also know that barking isn't necessary in dog communication. So when a dog is communicating to another dog, they usually find that their body language is effective, that it's getting their point across. There are a lot of hypotheses on this. The primary being that as we domesticated dogs and they started to evolve, becoming more intuitive to humans specifically, they needed a better outlet in order to communicate with us, and the bark seemed to be that outlet. So the barking has been proliferated and hypertrophied throughout evolution. Growling and snarling is a warning signal from the dog to the immediate threat that tension is escalating and that they are about to have to respond to the threat. Air nipping is also a warning. It's usually misconceived as a accidental bite, or like the dog was trying to bite. That doesn't necessarily usually happen. If a dog wants to bite, they use their teeth. So the fact that you just got a little air nip is really telling you that it's just a warning. If he wanted to hurt, he could have hurt. He chose not to. He didn't think he needed to take it to that step, so he was giving you another warning chance with that air nip. hopefully to prevent you from confronting him and escalating things. Now, as far as biting is concerned, I'm going to talk in very broad terms. I can't stress enough what I'm about to say is generalized. Please do not think that this immediately applies to your dog right now. It's incredibly generalized what I'm about to say, but in very broad terms, when it comes to biting, the louder the bite instant is, the less damage is actually being done. So usually if you have a dog that is aggressing and is biting a person or a dog, if it's very loud, a lot of energy is being put into making the scene loud and to making a big commotion about it, and which means that a lot of energy is not being spent in the actual bite itself. When a dog is truly aggressing, when a dog is truly with the ambition and goal to cause harm, generally speaking, it's quiet because that means that they're putting all of their energy into inflicting pain. Freezing and stiffness in the body is the most complex overt stress signal. That is because it can happen in two contexts. It can happen as a freeze response when adrenaline is being released, and it can also happen as a precursor signal to adrenaline being released. So it happens as a caution stage. And if you're interested in the difference between fear and caution, I did a video on that. It looks like this. I'll link it at the end of this video. But it is misunderstood because it can happen in both contexts. Freezing and staring is often accompanied by a closed mouth, which usually means that the breathing has been impaired. A lot of times because the dog looks stiff, because he is staring off into the abyss, because he's quiet, because his mouth is closed, the common dog owner might look at that and think, okay, well, he's relaxed, he's just looking, he's just staring. In some cases, that's very true. In some cases, the dog is just observing. And so that's one of the things that makes this particularly overt stress signal very complex, very complicated, very hard for the common dog owner to understand, is just because it can happen in these many different circumstances. Okay, so now I have given you the factual observable parts of these dog behaviors. Now I'm going to interject more subjectivity. Some of this is my personal opinion, but most of it is the consensus within the educated community that even though these are hypotheses, they're pretty educated, pretty agreed upon hypotheses. And so that's what we're going to talk about right now. So the piloerection, or the hair sticking up on the hackles, that tends to happen stereotypically in larger breeds. It can happen within all breeds, but it stereotypically happens within larger breeds, and it happens as a byproduct of hyperarousal. So one of the things that is confusing about this is that it doesn't necessarily mean that the dog is fearful, or that the dog is scared, or that the dog is angry about something. It literally just means that the brain is overstimulated, and more specifically, it means that the body is flexing. It means that the muscles are tensing, but that can happen for a lot of different reasons, including happiness. You take a dog to a dog park and the dog might become very happy, very silly, which can cause the muscles to flex, which can cause the piloerection. So we want to make sure that we are thinking in terms of excitability with this particular behavior, not necessarily an emotion, not necessarily like happiness or anger. Peeing and defecation is the most misunderstood stress signal, in my opinion. A lot of times people will have a dog with separation anxiety who pees every time they leave, and they think that that means that the dog is, somehow spiteful or disrespectful, or is doing it just to make you mad. There has been absolutely no evidence to indicate that dogs experience spite. I'm not saying it can't be proven in the future. I'm just saying that there are emotions absolutely that have been proven within a dog. Spite is not one of those. So to say that your dog is displaying spite doesn't make sense at all, particularly when we know that adrenaline has the effect of turning off these other systems like we talked about before. When we know that the more automatic systems that work tend to become impaired, tend to start functioning oddly when adrenaline is being released and the body does this shift, it makes sense that, of course, the dog is going to start peeing or defecating when they're stressed, because they're no longer functioning in a healthy way. In my experience, the lunging from a dog usually happens because of poor handling techniques. It can happen for other reasons. I don't want to discount that, but stereotypically, lunging on the leash happens because the owner has poor handling techniques. And I'm not going to cover all of those handling techniques right now, but I definitely recommend that you check out Grisha Stewart. She's got a YouTube channel and she's got a couple of wonderful handling techniques with leash handling and things like that. So I will link that in the description box below if you're interested in checking that out. In my humble opinion, and in the opinion of many educated folk, snarling, growling, air nipping, all of those things are the best motor patterns that dogs come equipped with. And that is because they are actively warning the stimulus. They're actively warning who they perceive as a threat, that things are escalating and that they don't want to have to aggress, but that they will if things continue getting out of hand. So when a dog is growling at you or snarling at you, they are giving you the opportunity to bow out. They are saying, look, homie, I don't want to have a fight with you right now. Please don't push me to this limit. If you continue doing this, things are going to get sour. And I consider it courteous when a dog gives me those signals. I go, thanks for the warning. I don't feel like losing a finger today, and you just helped a sister out. We cannot be punishing those signals. You do not want to punish a growl. You do not want to punish a snarl. You do not want to tell the dog that they are bad when they do that, because what ends up happening is you get rid of the snarl, you get rid of the growl, you get rid of these warning signals, but the bite is still going to happen. And the only difference is now the bite is going to happen by surprise, and you're not going to necessarily get a warning before it happens. So if you want to be told, hey, you're about to lose a finger, don't keep doing that, keep the snarl around, because it's going to help you in the long run. Now, biting is a worst case scenario for dogs. We do know that, as we talked about before, it's hazard avoidance. And so if the dog has put themselves in a biting situation where they felt like they needed to do so, they now feel like they can no longer avoid hazard. They feel like they must respond. Within the biting scale, we have a couple of different degrees of biting. I'm not going to get into that here because I don't think that that's pertinent right now, but we know that dogs really conserve the amount of damage that they do. I can't stress to you enough that when you have a dog that's biting, first of all, you need to help that dog. But secondly, be sympathetic for that dog. Understand that they did not want to do that. They did not want to have to be put in that position. It's incredibly taxing on the body. It is the equivalent to you getting in a really bad car wreck and barely walking out alive, and then the very next day you have to get back in a car again. And imagine how stressful that would be. Imagine how uncomfortable that would be to go in a really awful car crash, barely walk out alive, but then the very next day and for the rest of your life, you still have to live in cars. Stiffness in the body is probably the most overlooked behavior. As we talked about before, it can happen a lot of different phases. Stiffness in the body is one of the things that I see most commonly, ironically. Even though it is one of the most complex parts of stress, it is also the most common used by dogs. You're gonna see that tension, you're gonna see the body flex, you're gonna see them probably close their mouth, they're gonna stare, they're gonna orient, their ears are gonna probably go straight forward. They might even go glued back if they're asking for an appeasing behavior. We'll talk about appeasing behaviors in part 3. But we know that that tension in the body also impairs their ability to breathe well. So when I see a dog going through that, I know that's not a dog I can interact with, because it's not safe for me to interact with another species who isn't breathing well. Breathing is the first fundamental thing that every species needs to do in order to do everything else. If that dog isn't getting that, his ability to think reasonably and to have a healthy interaction with me is being dramatically impaired. So what I would say when you're looking at your own dog, but especially when you're looking at a stranger's dog who's doing this, is you need to think to yourself, how well is he breathing right now? Look at the abdomen. Yes, you're going to see tension in the body. Yes, you're going to see stiffness, but you actually want to look at his rib cage to see how well is he breathing. and can I get more fluidity throughout his body in order for him to start breathing well. In part 2 of this video, I will be talking about calming signals, which are signals that dogs use to de-escalate tension, de-escalate stress. If you enjoyed this particular video, make sure you tell me by hitting like. If you want to see the rest of the series, this part 2, part 3, part 4, make sure you hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon.